Cars may come and go, but the addiction sticks around longer. I'm Mike Hall. I collect way too many cars, forget where half of them are. And
Mike Hall's massive car auction in 2021 looked like the end of everything. 40 years of collecting vanished in one day. Rust Valley Restorers aired its final episode showing the heartbreaking sale. Fans said goodbye to the legendary Junkyard King. But something strange happened next. New episodes kept appearing. Mike was still on TV, still fixing cars, still living his dream. How did a man who lost his empire somehow keep his show alive? The answer reveals a secret most viewers never suspected about what really happened. Mike Hall was born on February 4, 1958. In St. Boniface, a part of Winnipeg, Manitoba. When he was still a young boy, his father got a job working for the Canadian Pacific Railway and the whole family moved west to Kamloops, British Columbia. That move changed everything for Mike. Life in the interior of British Columbia gave him room to roam and plenty of space to explore back roads and open fields. It didn't take long before one thing completely took over his world. Cars. Not shiny new ones, but old rusted-out wrecks sitting forgotten in fields and behind barns. By the early 1970s, when he was just a teenager, Mike had already started sneaking into people's backyards and scouting old country roads, looking for dead cars that he could bring back to life. While most kids were saving up for records or bikes, Mike was dragging home junkers that no one else wanted. He didn't see rust. He saw potential. A beat-up 50s coupe or a rotting pickup wasn't trash to him. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Some of his friends thought it was weird. Neighbors gave him odd looks, but he didn't care. He was already collecting car after car, storing them wherever he could. At a time when other kids were figuring out what they wanted to be, Mike already knew he wanted to fix things with wheels. By the time he hit his 20s in the late 1970s, Mike had gathered dozens of vintage cars. He hadn't gone to trade school. There weren't any fancy certificates on his wall. What he had was real-world experience. He'd taught himself everything. How to rebuild engines, how to shape metal, how to bring a car back from the dead. Every wreck he brought home turned into a lesson. Every engine that wouldn't start became a challenge. And slowly, all that trial and error turned into skill. The kind of skill that didn't come from a classroom. It came from busted knuckles and long nights in freezing sheds. Mike Hall didn't grow up thinking he'd end up owning hundreds of old cars. But his obsession with rust and engines didn't come out of nowhere. In the 1980s, long before the camera showed up, he was already climbing cliffs and blowing apart mountainsides to make a living. That's where his real career began. He started a company called Chimera Springs Rock Works. And it wasn't your average construction gig. Mike wasn't pouring concrete or laying bricks. He was drilling into cliff faces, hanging off ropes, and setting off controlled explosions. This was dangerous, exhausting work that most people wouldn't dare to do. But Mike thrived on the adrenaline. It was during those years that people started calling him the Rasta Blasta because of his long dreadlocked hair and his explosive day job. The nickname stuck and followed him for the rest of his life. Through the 1980s and 1990s and even into the 2000s, he stayed in that business. He became known in British Columbia for his blasting work, and he made good money doing it. But he wasn't saving it. He was spending almost all of it on junk cars, and not just one or two here and there. He had a hunger for forgotten vehicles. It didn't matter if they were full of rust or missing half their parts. If Mike thought the car had a soul or a story, he wanted it. And if it needed saving, that only made him want it more. He wasn't buying shiny restored classics. He was hunting for rust buckets that had been left behind. Over the next few decades, his property started filling up with vehicles from all over the map. Some of them were rare muscle cars from the 1960s. Others were beat-up pickup trucks or old European sports cars that hadn't run in years. Every time he blasted rock for a job and got paid, he'd use that money to bring another broken-down machine home. By the time the 2010s rolled around, people started asking how many cars he actually owned. The number was unbelievable. Over 400 vehicles were sitting on his land. And it wasn't just a collection. It was a landscape of rust and metal that stretched as far as you could see. He used to joke that he didn't collect cars, he collected rust. That's where the name Rust Brothers came from. The guys who worked with him weren't just mechanics or laborers. They were part of the same strange mission. Mike wasn't trying to flip cars for profit or build a showroom. He was trying to rescue machines that other people had forgotten. Even if they never got restored, just saving them from the scrapyard felt like a win. And while outsiders didn't always understand it, there was something about the way Mike talked about those cars that made it clear it wasn't just a hobby. It was something deeper. He once said he couldn't walk away from a car that needed saving. He felt drawn to them. And every explosion he set off during the day was just one more step toward being able to afford another piece of rolling history at night. Mike Hall never really tried to become a public figure. Long before he ever appeared on TV, he was already living a very different kind of life out in the Schwab area of British Columbia. He had quietly settled down on a farm there, somewhere peaceful and away from all the noise. He got married, though he never shared his wife's name with the public. They raised a family together, including their son, Connor Charman Hall, who was born in the 1980s. Mike also had a little dog named Minnie, who quickly became another part of the family. But even though the farm was quiet, Mike himself was anything but. His obsession with cars didn't stop just because he had a wife and kid. In fact, it caused a bit of trouble at home. His wife had to lay down a rule. No more junk cars on their property. Their farm was 26 acres, and she didn't want it turning into another rust-filled graveyard. But Mike didn't argue. He simply found another place to chase his dream. He bought a separate 5-acre lot in the nearby town of Tappen, not far from Shuswap Lake. It was just off the Trans-Canada Highway, and it became something legendary. That place turned into what people would later call Mike's Field of Dreams. It was just a sunburned piece of land filled with hundreds of rusting old cars stretching out as far as you could see. Some were from the 1940s, some from the 1970s. Others were completely stripped down or buried in grass. But to Mike, every single one of them still had life left in it. He didn't see rust. He saw potential. Through the 2000s, Mike's life moved between two extremes. During the day, he worked his main job, blasting rocks as part of a highway construction crew. But at night, he transformed. He would head to his junkyard, working alone like a mad scientist, trying to breathe life back into forgotten metal. He didn't care if no one was watching. He wasn't doing it for fame. He did it because he loved it. But fate had other plans. In 2016, something unexpected happened. Mike was working in the mountains of British Columbia when a major rock slide blocked the highway. The cleanup crew needed help and fast. So they called in Mike Hall. And when he arrived with his gear and experience, something wild happened. The Discovery Channel crew was filming a documentary called Highway Through Hell, and they decided to include Mike in one of the episodes. That's when the world got its first real look at him. Wearing a hard hat and scaling cliffs like it was nothing, Mike walked up to a mountain of boulders and set his charges. He used his famous Rasta blasted dynamite system to break the rocks apart and clear the road. It was just a cameo, a few minutes on screen, but it was enough. His fearless attitude, his crazy hair, and his wild energy made people stop and take notice. By the time Mike Hall hit his late 50s, his quiet corner of Tappen, British Columbia, had turned into something most people couldn't believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. Spread across acres of land were more than 500 rusted-out cars. Some were sinking into the dirt. Others were half covered in weeds. But Mike didn't see junk. He saw history. He saw potential. He knew every single car. He could tell you the make, model, and exact year just by glancing at it. One article even said he could describe the features of each of the 562 vehicles scattered around his property. It wasn't a guess. He remembered where he got each one and what it meant to him. Some had been with him for more than 30 years. A few had been sitting there nearly 40. They weren't just cars. They were his life. But it was becoming too much. The dream that once excited him had quietly started to turn into a burden. Storing over 500 decaying cars wasn't just about space anymore. It cost money. It needed time. It needed energy. And it brought attention. Sometimes the wrong kind. Neighbors got curious. Officials started asking questions. Mike couldn't ignore the signs anymore. His body was slowing down. In 2020, he admitted that age was catching up to him. He said openly that he couldn't possibly restore every car he owned in the years he had left. He'd watched what happened to people who didn't plan ahead. His own father had passed away at just 60. And now Mike was approaching the same number. That thought began to haunt him. He had seen friends and fellow collectors pass away or get sick, leaving behind a mess for their families. And his mind kept coming back to one question. What would happen to his 500 cars if he suddenly wasn't around? He said it out loud once, not to stir drama, but because it was real. What are my wife and kids going to do with 400 cars in a field? It wasn't just a sad thought. It was a warning. One that would shape every decision he made from that point forward. In 2016, Mike Hall looked around his property in Tappen, British Columbia, and realized he might finally be ready to slow down. After decades of collecting old cars, chasing rust, and piling up vintage wrecks, he had gathered more than 300 of them across 5 acres. It was too much. He wanted out. Not a little bit, but all the way. So, he made a bold decision. He put everything up for sale in one giant package. The land, the cars, the rust, the mess, and the madness. The asking price was $1.19 million. To most people, that sounded insane. Who would want a field full of junkers? The ad didn't bring serious offers. Everyone saw it the same way. It wasn't a car collection, it was a scrapyard. Instead of giving up or lowering the price, Mike did something completely unexpected. In 2017, he raised the price. He asked for $1.45 million. What happened next?